In 1587, three English ships pierced the misty veil of the Atlantic, carrying over 100 souls to a new world. Their destination was Roanoke Island, a sliver of land off the coast of modern-day North Carolina, promising a fresh start. Led by Governor John White, these families, men, women, and young people, were not soldiers, but pioneers seeking a better life. The land they found was a dense primeval forest, both beautiful and intimidating, a wall of green against the gray ocean. Their first steps on the shore were filled with a fragile optimism, the salty air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. They found the remnants of a previous, failed military expedition, a grim reminder of the challenges that lay ahead for them. Despite the ominous signs, they began their monumental task, to carve a new home out of the formidable American wilderness. The sun set on their first day, casting long, deep shadows that seemed to dance and writhe at the edge of their camp. Here, on this remote outpost of the English Empire, a story began that would become one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Little did they know, their small flame of civilization was about to be extinguished in the most baffling way imaginable. With determination, the colonists set to work. The forest echoed with the sound of axes and saws, a symphony of creation. Simple, sturdy houses of timber and daub began to take shape, forming a small, vulnerable street in the vast wilderness. A protective palisade, a wall of sharpened logs, was erected around the settlement, a necessary defense against unknown dangers. Daily life was a constant struggle. They planted crops, hunted in the dense woods, and fished in the Sound's murky waters. Governor White, an artist by trade, documented their new life, sketching the local flora, fauna, and the indigenous people they encountered. The birth of Virginia Dare, the first English person born in the Americas, was a moment of profound joy and hope for the colony. But the land was not as fertile as they had hoped. Their English farming techniques were ill-suited to the sandy soil. Relationships with the local Croatoan and Secatan tribes were complex, shifting between cautious trade and deep-seated mistrust. As their initial supplies dwindled, a growing sense of anxiety began to creep into the small, isolated community. The dream of a new Eden was slowly being replaced by the harsh reality of survival on a precarious frontier. With winter approaching and food running desperately low, the colony faced a grim choice. Someone had to return to England for help. The colonists pleaded with their governor, John White, to make the perilous journey. He was their most persuasive advocate. White was reluctant. To leave meant abandoning his daughter, Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, to an uncertain fate. But the survival of all 117 colonists depended on it. With a heavy heart, he finally agreed to go. Before he left, they devised a secret code. If the colonists had to move, they would carve their destination into a tree. If they left under duress, they were to add a Maltese cross. It was a simple plan for a complex situation. The farewells on the beach were fraught with emotion. White promised a swift return, a vow he fully intended to keep. As his ship sailed over the horizon, the colonists of Roanoke stood watching, their figures shrinking against the vast, empty shoreline. They were now utterly alone, a tiny island of English life in a sea of unknown continent, waiting for a ship that was fatefully delayed. What should have been a journey of a few months would stretch into an agonizing 3 years, sealing the colony's mysterious destiny. Back on Roanoke, the first few months of waiting were filled with nervous anticipation. Every sail on the horizon brought a surge of hope. But as a full year passed, with no sign of White's return, that hope began to curdle into a quiet, gnawing dread. Unbeknownst to them, England was at a high-stakes standoff with Spain, and all available ships were pressed into military service. John White's desperate attempts to secure a relief vessel were repeatedly denied. His colony was stranded by geopolitics. On the island, the seasons turned. A harsh winter gave way to a sweltering summer, and then another cold winter descended. The wooden walls of their homes and the palisade grew weathered and gray. The settlement began to look tired, worn down by time. What conversations took place? What plans were made? Did they decide to move inland or attempt to join a local tribe? Their existence became a ghost story waiting to happen, their daily lives unrecorded, their thoughts lost to the wind. The second year passed, then a third. The hope for rescue must have faded completely, replaced by the stark need for survival. At some point during this long silence, the colonists of Roanoke simply ceased to be there. The town became empty. Finally, in August of 1590, 3 years after he departed, John White secured passage back to the New World. As his ship approached Roanoke Island, his heart must have been pounding with a mix of excitement and terror. The crew anchored in the Sound as evening fell. They saw a plume of smoke rising from the island and grew hopeful. They sounded trumpets and sang familiar English songs, expecting an answer from the shore, but only silence responded. The smoke they had seen was just a forest fire, not the welcoming signal they had desperately wished for. An unsettling quiet hung over the island. There were no welcoming lights, no sounds of life, no answer to their calls. The next morning, White and a small party rowed to shore, their anxiety mounting with every pull of the oars. As they landed, the silence was the first thing they noticed. It was absolute, unnatural. The birds themselves seemed to be quiet. They followed the familiar path toward the settlement, a path now overgrown with weeds and creeping vines from the forest. They were walking into a ghost town, a place that was once their home, now a silent monument to a vanished population. Upon reaching the settlement, they found the palisades still standing, strong and intact, but the gate was wide open. Inside, an even deeper silence reigned. The houses were still there, but they were hollow shells, completely empty of people. There were no bodies, no skeletons, no signs of any kind of skirmish or violent confrontation. It was not a scene of devastation. It was as if over 100 people had simply stood up one day and walked away, leaving everything behind. Weeds choked the small gardens. The paths were being reclaimed by grass. Nature was patiently erasing all signs of human life. White frantically searched his own cottage, the place he had left his daughter and granddaughter. He found it empty like the rest. He discovered that his own chests, buried for safekeeping, had been dug up and ransacked, their contents damaged by weather. But the settlement's boats were gone. This suggested the colonists had not been taken by surprise, but had left deliberately. The entire population had vanished into thin air. The careful construction of the town now stood as a silent, baffling testament. Where did they go? And why did they leave in such an orderly yet complete fashion? The search for answers had just begun. As White and his men continued their desperate search, they remembered the plan they had made 3 years earlier. They were to look for a carved message indicating where the colonists had gone. They began examining the posts and trees. Then, one of the men called out. He had found something. Carved into a large post of the palisade was a single word. The letters were clear and deeply gouged into the wood, as if done without haste. The word was Croatoan. Just that. Croatoan. There was no other message, no other sign. It was the only clue to their whereabouts. Crucially, the carving lacked the agreed-upon distress signal. There was no Maltese cross to be found anywhere. This suggested that the colonists had not fled in panic, but had moved deliberately and with purpose to their new location. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and the home of a friendly tribe of Native Americans. A wave of relief washed over White. His family and his people were not gone, merely relocated. He now knew where to look. But as hope dawned, fate intervened with cruel timing. The sky began to darken, and the sea grew restless. With the clue Croatoan giving them a clear destination, White and his men hurried back to their ship, ready to sail south. But a great storm, a hurricane, was bearing down on them. The Atlantic, which had carried them here, now turned into a raging enemy. For days, the tempest battered the ship. The winds howled and the sea churned, making any attempt to sail south impossible. The ship lost its anchor and was nearly driven ashore. The sailors, fearing for their lives, refused to risk the treacherous shoals near Croatoan. So close to an answer, White was forced to watch as his chance to find his family was ripped away by the storm. With their supplies low and the ship damaged, the captain made a difficult decision. They had to abandon the search and return to England. John White, heartbroken and defeated, sailed away from Roanoke for the last time, the word Croatoan echoing in his mind. He would never again have the funds or the opportunity to return to America to search for his daughter and the lost colonists. The search was over. The colonists, wherever they were now truly lost to the world, their fate sealed by a storm. The final tantalizing clue was left uninvestigated, transforming the story from a rescue mission into an enduring, unsolved mystery. In the centuries since their disappearance, countless theories have emerged to explain the fate of the Roanoke colonists. The most obvious is assimilation. The Croatoan clue suggests they simply moved to the other island and merged with the friendly Native American tribe living there. Later explorers reported encounters with gray-eyed, fair-haired Native Americans in the area, lending some credence to this popular theory. Another theory suggests the colonists attempted to sail back to England on their own and were lost at sea in their small boats. Some believe they were not met with kindness and that the colony was quietly overcome by a less friendly neighboring tribe. The lack of bodies or widespread destruction, however, makes a large-scale confrontation seem unlikely to most historians. A more recent archaeological find, a map patch drawn by John White, hints at a planned move 50 miles inland to a fort of a new plan. Perhaps they split up, with some going to Croatoan and others attempting to build a new settlement deeper in the continent. Disease is another possibility. A swift epidemic could have devastated the population, with survivors joining local tribes for support. Each theory has its proponents and its flaws. Without a definitive discovery, the truth remains buried by time and speculation. More than 4 centuries have passed, yet the mystery of the Lost Colony of Roanoke has never faded. It has only deepened. It has become America's oldest unsolved mystery, a foundational ghost story woven into the nation's very beginnings. The story speaks to our deepest fears: abandonment, the unknown, and the terrifying power of the wilderness to swallow civilization whole. It is a haunting reminder that history is not always a neat collection of facts, but is often filled with gaps and silent questions. The names of the colonists, including Virginia Dare, the first English person born in the New World, are remembered not for their lives, but for their disappearance. Modern science and archaeology continue to chip away at the mystery, with every new dig offering a potential breakthrough. Perhaps one day, a definitive piece of evidence, a shard of pottery, a European burial, will finally provide a conclusive answer. But perhaps the power of the story lies in its very ambiguity. It is a puzzle without a solution. A city that vanished overnight, leaving behind a single, cryptic word and a silence that has lasted for centuries. The Lost Colony of Roanoke remains a testament to the fact that some secrets may be lost to time forever.